I think today's video could be labeled as magical. So much so that I'm sure that the comments below will be filled with resistance. See what I did? Enjoy the video.
Let the lesson begin.
What's up guys, Akariss here, bringing you another Fire Emblem Heroes video. Today's video is going to be talking about the Tomes, if you're not already guessed by the title of the video. Tomes, magic damage, and just res hitting heroes in this game in general. But what I'm gonna do, and this is more fun in nature, so don't take it too seriously, and I'm sure I probably didn't list your favorite hero, so don't, before you start raging angrily in the comments below, just remember this is my opinion, and this list will definitely change. Maybe even a few months down the road. But essentially what I'm going to be doing in this video, folks, I'm going to take a look at the top 10 magical or res hitting units in the game that I feel are the most useful from a general perspective. So usually a character that can fulfill more than just one role. For example, could be useful on defense, on offense, maybe an arena. So something like that is my general criteria for a character that can be used in multiple modes or might still have some pretty good potential in the months to come. That's what I'm going to go on, how I want to fill out this list. I'm just going to list a couple of the best characters that I feel are in the game right now, and of course I will list some runner-ups, so who I feel could definitely or came really close to making this list. So with that being said, I'm not actually going to start with the tomes. I'm going to start with staffs. And what I feel is probably the best staff user in the game right now is the new young La Rochelle. Now, young La Rochelle is very interesting from my point of view because she has a really good staff, but that is not the only reason. The big reason that I feel she's really as good as she is because she has an amazing offensive stat spread, and the highest in the game. So attack and speed plus her weapon gives her additional attack and speed, and because her weapon essentially can inflict dazzle, like at the beginning of the turn, you can combine her with a lull skill or the far trace skill. So I feel the biggest threat, or one of the best units on defense right now, is easily Child La Rochelle. And she doesn't need to use her preference weapon, but that is just an additional card in her arsenal that makes her stand out. So again, like I said, this is what I feel is one of the best. She can be used on both offense and defense and a couple other places without a doubt, and colorless damage is always pretty solid unless you run into those crazy Raven Tomes. But I'll be fair, I'll give you guys my thoughts on some runner-ups because this list isn't just black and white. The first runner-up I feel for very, very solid, maybe second or third place would be Sarah. Sarah's, again, staff is extremely good. Can be used, depending on the meta, to really shut down a lot of debuffs or isolations and such. She has a good offensive stat spread as well, but being infantry is a little bit less for my taste. If she was Cavalier, she'd probably take this spot. On top of that, Lane does kind of come close to a second or third place because having just 30% damage reduction and healing capabilities makes her very powerful as well. But I don't feel she was as good as La Rochelle, so in my opinion, La Rochelle does take that staff best slot from my point of view. Let's jump into the tomes, shall we? First up, on who I think is the best red tome in the game, is Duo Sigurd. Okay, this is probably not a big surprise to many, but there is probably not a more influential healer, cav dancer in the game. And honestly, he's not the best because he's a red tome. He's the best because he's a cav dancer. So as soon as we would get another cav dancer, there's nothing necessarily that makes Sigurd as impactful as he is in that position right now. But I have to give it to him because he's in that red tome slot. So if you're just looking for the best red tome unit in the game, it's Sigurd right now. And he, not only that, but he's a dual hero. So not only is he a cav dancer, but he can use a raven tome. He's got a dual skill which lets him reposition on top of dancing at 3 movement without any sort of beast conditions. So this guy is definitely at the top of the red tome slot. Now there is some somewhat hefty competition here, especially when it comes to actually red tome usage, because that isn't what defines Sigurd. But the runner-ups for sure in this slot would be Lilina, who again is really powerful, and 3 movement range with a sky-high attack stat and a decent res stat to boot. And that AoE damage and just how it's like matches up against units with like low res definitely made Lilina a solid red tome best candidate in the game right now. But what is also a solid runner-up to that, and probably a surprise to many of you, is what I would consider Brave Lysithea. Now, this is probably a shocker, but don't forget, Brave Lysithea basically has null follow-up and desperation in her tome, which is extremely good on top of cav effectiveness. And the reason we don't see her, the reason I feel she's not like meta-defining yet, is because there isn't so many enablers for her. We don't have as much enablement of that tome as there could be, because having desperation null follow-up in a weapon itself and then having like an open B slot on top of that is just really good. But realistically, the only way to enable such a strong unit like this is like your lightning trap, which you can't depend on, or Winter Vendetta, who is also very unique but rare and seasonal, and therefore we don't see Brave Lysithea as often as we could. She's extremely good, but just can't crack that top slot until something comes about that enables her in a great way. We get a skill that basically chips you for 1 damage at the beginning of the turn, and boom, you're going to see Brave Lysithea all over the place. All right, let's move on. Next up is the blue tome, which will be, it's Micaiah. Micaiah has literally been a force to be reckoned with since she was released. I haven't felt like she actually was irrelevant at any point, besides maybe the time when there was like no ether raids. Right before ether raids, I guess she wasn't that good in arena, but even then you could argue if you could afford to put Micaiah into your arena team, she was a solid inclusion, because having cav effectiveness and that armor effectiveness makes her just super solid in most metagames. The fact that you see so many cavs right now in the game, that she has an auto follow-up as long as she's above 50%, a solid candidate of Null Sea Disrupt, a resplendent skin. There's just so much going for Micaiah that I like, plus her refine, revitalize her even further, and she has damage reduction. There's just so many good things about Micaiah that keeps her in like the best blue tome slot right now, from my point of view, of course. But there are some good runner-ups for this, so I will have to, of course, recognize those guys. And the first one is Reinhardt. To no one's surprise, Resplendent Reinhardt is a force to be reckoned with. He doesn't even have a refine yet, and when that happens, I don't even care if it does literally nothing but give him stats. He's still going to be extremely strong. Now, Rein is good in much of the content in the game. It doesn't matter where you put him, and stuff like a refine and B dual cav is only going to accelerate his dominance in this game. But it's not only Rein. I'd say that Guinevere is a pretty solid runner-up for that best blue tome slot as well, because having healing, an insanely good res stat, disabling, adaptive damage, and effectiveness against tomes is pretty solid if the meta demands it, and we do see a lot of magical damage where Guinevere does shine. Now, here is what I feel the best blue tome, or should I say blue slot in the game right now, and that is pressing the thumbs up button. Yes, right below there. If you just click that and turn it blue, that is pretty good, and it is pretty blue. So let us continue, shall we? All right, next up is in the green tome, who I feel is the best right now in the game, and that is Pent. So Pent is, again, really set up for not only being extremely good supportive, because he accelerates anything that's like a tome user, so it doesn't even need to be infantry, but if it was infantry, you could combine him with infantry pulse and then be accelerating almost your whole team and creating these great nukes. In a way, like bringing back the sort of infantry pulse teams or whatnot. And I feel that's an extremely unique mechanic that he isn't really going to give up anytime soon. On top of his really good offensive stat spread, his tome accelerating himself, giving him extra damage, a sky-high attack stat, and you have yourself one of the better units in the game, especially for a green tome. But as I said, nothing comes without some difficult decision making, and green tomes do have competitiveness in here. And the first one I will mention is not the blue thumbs up, but Merrick. Okay, so Merrick is extremely good as well because he has null follow-up, and anyone who's using null follow-up in their weapon, as you know by the Lobster, aka Ryoma, is going to be pretty good. So Merrick also kind of, the reason we don't see him is again more of a seasonal problem. So he's only been on like 2 banners, his initial run about a year ago, and now his rerun, and probably got ignored for more appetizing or more appealing banners. But realistically, this guy has a preference special, and he has a preference tome that is extremely good, and he gets ignored just because there's other stuff that might seem more appealing, or maybe he's just not enough of a popular character. Realistically though, Merrick is a solid green tome, and we just don't see him enough to warrant his position there. But if I did see him more often, he would be more meta impactful. Pent is in the permapool, and therefore he's going to be showing up a lot. But another runner-up that I feel deserves a mention here is going to be Winter Bernadetta. At the time of this video, she's very good because she's the only enabler of characters like Brave Lucythia who depend on some sort of chip damage, or return traps, or rescue traps, or anything like that, where Bernadetta just enables certain teams that no other character in the game can do. And as long as she can do that, that definitely deserves a mention here in that green tome category. As you guys have noticed, uniqueness or just very powerful effects in your weapons, preference skills, preference weapons, whatever, those define the best characters in the game from my point of view, and that is how I make a list like this, because I see those characters and I have to recognize their immense power. Bernadetta, on top of all this, actually has damage reduction as long as she's taken that damage. So on top of just being a really unique mechanic, she also gets damage reduction, which can really help her into securing tons of kills. Let's move on, shall we? Next up is Colourless Tomes, which you actually know, guys, there's like 3. It's literally only 3. But out of picking the 3, I actually concluded that the circus wins. So that would be Zane. Zane is probably the most meta resilient of the 3 of the Colourless Tomes, because honestly his weapon just completely depends on other units, and because of that he's just a blank slate. He's always going to be good, because not good, but like always going to adapt, because all it matters is what your allies have in sort of stat spreads and what skills are made available in the game, and just inheriting it to him. So think of him just as like a ghost or a clown who just mimics everything else, and he is just going to be good and resilient to whatever meta is in the game. One of the best synergies I feel you could pair someone like Zane with would be near save, and then you can forego using something like close counter and have an ally who's giving him stats but also protecting him from those melee hits that other units may want to jump into. So I have to give Zane the slot here, but I gotta be real, there's not that much competition for him to really, you know, it's like literally the runner-ups are the other 2, right? So we have Bridal Micaiah, who is really strong. I'm not going to doubt that, but relying on that dual skill and buffs to really be as good as she is, I would honestly prefer the other Micaiahs over Bridal Micaiah. And my usage of Bridal Micaiah personally has really dwindled, because the inability to use a dual skill because of enemy dual hindrance really takes away from a lot of the strength of what dual Micaiah can do, unfortunately, which again, consistency is key, but also unique mechanics, and honestly Bridal Micaiah doesn't have that much uniqueness in her. Next up is Bramimond, of course, as a runner-up, and if you could use this guy, let's say in air offense, that would be pretty good. If C dual infantry existed and you could place him into arena confidently, then he would be much better as well. But the reality is he's mostly just defense guy, and he's a 1v1 kind of stat check sort of character, and because of that I can't really call him that unique. The 1v1 mechanic is cool, but it really all depends on stat comparisons and some skills between the A's and the B's and the enemy's C skill. So it's interesting, but honestly at the end of the day, Zane should outperform both of these in the times to come. Now, those were the tome users, but that's not all of them, right? Next up, and of course more res hitting candidates, are dragons. And first to start this off will be the red dragon. Now, the best red dragon in the game, from my point of view, is Dual Athun. Now, what makes Dual Athun really good is you don't really need to rely on her dual skill, but if you could use it, that's crazy, because, of course, taking off armor and dragon effectiveness is going to make one of these types of characters from really unviable to extremely viable. And like I mentioned just right before, if you combine that with Zane, a near save like this could be a good partner. So of course you don't have to use dual attune like this. You could use it with distant counter, maybe far save instead, whatever. There's a lot of flexibility in how you do it, but on top of all that, dual attune wants to be near her friends and she can remove penalties, and that makes her a solid carry potential or support unit that I feel is viable for the time to come. Runner-ups to the red dragon slot though would be Enna, and I've covered Enna in a Dragon Wall video as well from before, and Enna in an analysis from months ago. She's really solid, especially for a free character. I don't think she's lacking really in anything and has a lot of build flexibility plus carry potential. As a red dragon, she holds up because of her near recency stat spread and the way that's allocated. But, and as a shock to maybe some of you who I would consider a solid runner-up to the red dragon slot, is Garen. Now Garen is likely due for refine soon-ish, but he is a character who can be used in offense, in arena with our dual infantry. He's not necessarily a dragon, and that taking away that sort of weakness makes him very good, on top of having a fairly good min-max stat spread, dumping most of his speed and gaining a very high amount of defense, res, and attack. His highish HP also helps him for creating even more effective bulk. Once this guy gets a refine, I could see him being extremely powerful. I wanted to think about putting Sothis in here, but she has the same problems that Brammy does, which is unfortunately locked into defense where she's not that good, and in arena she definitely can be pretty good, but unfortunately that's the extent of where you can use Sothis, and not being able to use her in air offense is a huge drawback that I feel even Garen would outperform her in. Next up is the Blue Dragons. My candidate for best Blue Dragon in the game is, without a doubt, Lilith. And the reason I say without a doubt is because she has such a unique, good mechanic. Ally support teleportation with literally no condition is insanely powerful that I don't see enough. And when you consider something like Fallen Edelgard, who just got released, who synergizes with Lilith, and Fallen Edelgard can go in and initiate, and you combine something like potentially a Lilith who's ally supported and can run near trace on top of that, you have a super nice cleanup unit who doesn't need to use Gale Force, and if she could, that would be even more crazy, but can go in without conditions and help on that cleanup pretty well. But on top of that, using near trace, not having to rely on Wings of Mercy, and get into a super comfy position to close out a Gale Force setup. I don't think there's even a close second place for the Blue Dragon slot. Lilith is by far the best and unique character in this slot, but is definitely underutilized. Don't fodder her for joint drive attack, and consider how powerful she could be in some team compositions that you might want to run. Whoops, slight reveal there. Next up is, of course, the runner-ups to the Blue Dragons, and I would put male Fallen Corrin here. He does have a fairly good stat spread, and he has a pretty good weapon as well, which includes guard effects on your opponent, but also all the other effects that Fallen female Corrin had. Now, Corrin is another one of those, like, I just have a bunch of stats and I'm relying on those stats to work, but on top of that, his solo conditions could end up being a negative in some scenarios, and I do appreciate that he can work, but I feel like Colourless does it a bit better, like Fallen Female Corrin, and the guard effect is nice, but at the end of the day, it's not really a unique mechanic that's going to set him apart from other stuff. Another good candidate for the Blue Dragon slot, and unfortunately there just isn't that much competition here, is going to be Cyros. Now, Cyros is, I think because of the recent bonus Cyros season, we would like have a sort of feeling that we feel she's really powerful, but you gotta remember, she's in the season that shares with Naga, who gives Divine Fang and essentially dragon effectiveness to everyone, and she doesn't, if she runs like distant counter for example, she's not going to be as threatening on your enemy phase, even if she can auto double. If she runs an impact, then she's easier to kill on your player phase. So Cyros has a lot of drawbacks, and her preference skill, just buffing other mythics, is not as good as I feel like it could be compared to other mythics. And in time, as we get more Anima mythics, I don't see Cyros being that impactful as what we potentially could see in the future. Now, for those of you that were paying attention, here's the best green dragon in my opinion, being Myr. She has aged really well because of the advent of Ryan skills, Dragon's Ire, potentially Dragon's Wall as well, and her preference weapon essentially being sort of like a null follow-up, a little bit like a null follow-up. And that easily puts Myr in the top slot for me here because she has a good stat spread. She has great skills, great preference skills, and access to a lot of good stuff. Mer just has really solid matchups across the board. And I feel like her biggest issue is essentially dragon slaying, but you don't see enough of it to really be fully concerned, and because of that, I can safely put her here as the best green dragon that hits res. The follow-ups and runner-ups for this are going to be Halloween Grima, who is really strong, but her reliance on her healing makes her a lot less consistent from my point of view, and that's because Fatal Smoke now exists, and because of that I can't easily put her into the best slot. And because she has a basically doomed speed stat, you can't really depend on her to win sort of speed checks with like Dragon's Ire and such, where she's going to get denied her doubles and miss kills all over the place. I think she's really powerful, and that's why she's runner-up, but there are definitely some huge drawbacks that I feel Mer doesn't share compared to her. On top of that, Winter Sothis. A little bit of a surprise, of course, but you got to remember she's not actually a dragon. She doesn't count as one, and she has Sirius, which combines really well with Special Fighter. I feel like if we start hitting those seasonal refines in more strides, then she's going to make a comeback for sure, because she stands out as being not having as many weaknesses and really benefits from some armor unique skills, such as the saves being released, of course. So I had to put her in here. I think she's a solid candidate for green dragons. Let's do colorless. Oh, look, it's the same thing. It's Spring Mer. So Spring Mer has a lot of the same benefits that OG Mer has, but she has colorless, which I feel has more even matchups, but also 40% damage reduction on enemy phase. Now, damage reduction isn't extremely consistent, considering a lot of units can now pierce through it through different ways, including Deadeye and Dual Lift and such, but it's still very powerful, will work most of the time, and I chose to give her IO Shield in this displayed build because you can't necessarily rely on her dual skill providing her that IO's effect. You don't really want to get sniped, so I feel like just having that consistency in the IO Shield is very important, and not rely on the dual skill for trying to get that immunity. So I wanted to put Spring Mer here. She is a solid candidate, and the runner-ups for this will be Mila and Duma. I had to put both, honestly, because they're just both so impactful in what they do. Mila essentially defines the Dark Defense archetype, and Duma has aged so well considering the years past that Upheaval essentially controls a lot of the outcomes or aggressiveness of the Anima season, and Duma still retains that spot of hitting for a solid 7 damage, making your team stronger, and taking out key buildings like Bull Tower, which may otherwise like doom your team. Now, I had to put in both, but realistically there is a third runner-up, and that's Legendary Corrin. Negating Fang is really powerful. She can actually use Dragon Wall to some solid degree as well, or even Dragon's Ire, I guess, or no follow-up. So I had to put Legendary Corrin here. She's really strong, and Negating Fang is mostly the defining reason for that. Now, those of you who were paying attention might have noticed we're at 9 characters for this top 10. And the reason there is no 10 is because we went through all the tomes, staff, and dragons, but there are another set of characters that hit res. And the best of those 3 characters is Felicia, who's been like literally forgotten. So Felicia's effect, if you don't remember, on her weapon is essentially like Special Fighter against Tome users, but also hitting res on all units or defense, depending on what she has an advantage in. This makes her res stat, her attack and her res stat, allow her to adapt into having more favorable matchups. I feel like Felicia's a little bit forgotten, but she's extremely good in a sort of meta similar to Guinevere, where you have a lot of tome or magical damage, where her high res and high attack really help a lot. So using Null Sea Disrupt with something like Stance 3 and pumping up her res and attack lets her really cut through things. But Felicia isn't the only res hitting or potentially res hitting unit in the game. The runner-ups for this slot are obviously Petrine, who has Flame Lance, and again I feel that's super unique, but not as impactful as someone like Felicia could be. And finally another Dark Defense mythic. Hell. Now, I don't feel like Hell seems like she should be good because she has immunity to death and can synergize that with Mystic Boost, but at the end of the day, I just haven't been impressed with both my usage of Hell and playing into Hell. She hasn't been that hellish. Alright folks, that'll cover my top 10 list of magic damage dealers or res hitting units in this game. I tried to cover every single tome, staff, and dragon in the game, and I'm trying to give everyone some credit. Your favorite may not be listed here, and I'm sorry for that. And if you guys like this video, then definitely do your diligence, give it that thumbs up, turn it blue. Let me know in the comments below what you think I may have unfairly missed, but I feel like I gave everyone a shot here that deserved these spots, and I will do a physical, maybe a physical damage dealers. If you like this content, you want to keep see it coming, consider the Patreon in the description below, join the YouTube membership, or hit me up with Twitch. Prime subs are free there. By doing that, you can reach out to the Discord and have a more closer connection to me, and I would love to get to know you all better. Love you all. See you in the next one. Much love. Peace.
It's over.